The night my wife turned my concern into a public joke, I learned that freedom sounds different when someone else is paying for the room you call your own. The microwave clock glowed 12:47 a.m. In the dark kitchen of our house in Brentwood, Tennessee, bright green numbers floating above the stove like a quiet accusation. I stood barefoot on the cold tile, one hand around a glass of water I had not touched, the other holding my phone. Outside, the porch light shone over the front steps. Her white SUV was not in the driveway. The garage bay on her side sat empty. I had told myself not to call. I had walked from the kitchen to the living room, then back again, listening to the old house settle around me, trying to be the kind of husband modern people say men should be. Not controlling, not jealous, not needy. Give her space. Trust her. Let her breathe. But trust does not make the interstate safer at 1 in the morning. Space does not tell you whether the woman who promised to be home before 10 is still okay 3 hours later. So I called. The first ring felt normal. The second felt foolish. On the third, the line clicked open and noise poured into my kitchen. Music, laughter, wind moving across a rooftop somewhere downtown. Allison's voice came through bright and loose, the way it sounded when she had an audience. "Daniel," she said, stretching my name like it was a punchline she had been waiting to deliver. I heard a man laugh behind her. Chase Reynolds. I knew his laugh by then, polished and careless, the sound of a man who never had to pay for the consequences he encouraged. "Are you all right?" I asked. That was all. For simple words. Not "where are you?" Not "who are you with?" Not "get home now." Just "are you all right?" There was a pause, and in that pause, I heard her make a choice. The background noise dipped slightly, like she had put me on speaker. "Do not call me," Allison said, louder now, cleaner, making sure the people around her could hear. "I am not your property." The laughter came fast. Not huge, not wild, just enough. A little chorus of approval from people sitting above a city they did not own, drinking under string lights, mistaking disrespect for independence because it looked good in the moment. Chase laughed the loudest. I stood in my kitchen and looked at the spare key she had left on the counter that morning beside a receipt from a boutique in Green Hills. The key had a small brass tag shaped like a lake cabin. She loved that cabin. Loved posting pictures from the porch, coffee in hand, fog over the water, captions about peace and privacy. She called it our little escape whenever someone was watching. She had never asked why the tax notices went to my office. She had never asked whose name sat behind the trust that owned it. That was Allison's gift. She could enjoy the foundation without ever looking down. My throat tightened. Not with anger at first. With recognition. There are moments in marriage when one sentence does not create the truth. It reveals how long the truth has been sitting in the room. I thought about all the nights I had waited up without complaining. All the times I had paid the insurance on the SUV she called hers, handled the maintenance on the house she called ours, covered the lake cabin she called freedom, and still let her tell her friends that I made her feel trapped because I asked if she got home safely. I did not raise my voice. I did not ask who was laughing. I did not tell her to stop embarrassing me. Men lose more than arguments when they beg for basic respect. They teach the room that respect is negotiable. I looked around the kitchen I had remodeled before our 5th anniversary, the quartz counters, the soft-close cabinets, the brass fixtures Allison had chosen from a catalog and later complained were already out of style. I looked toward the hallway, where framed photos of us smiled from vacations booked with miles from my business card, in a house purchased before our marriage and protected by documents she had never cared to read. Then I breathed once, slow enough to feel the old version of myself step back. "Perfect," I said. The laughter on the other end thinned, like people could sense the floor changing beneath the joke. "Then do not come home to my property." No one laughed after that. I ended the call before Allison could answer, set the phone face down on the counter, and opened the laptop I had left beside the fruit bowl. The email to my attorney was already drafted. Subject line, "Proceed tonight." The email had been sitting in my drafts for 19 days, and that was the part Allison would never understand. She would call it impulsive. She would tell her friends I snapped because she stayed out late. She would say I was trying to control her because that version made her the hero and me the husband who could not handle a woman with a life of her own. But men like me do not draft legal emails at 1 in the morning because of one phone call. We draft them after months of being told that concern is control, loyalty is boring, and silence means we have accepted our place. I pressed send. then sat in the kitchen while the screen dimmed and the house returned to its old breathing sounds. The refrigerator hummed. The ice maker clicked. The heating vent whispered through the floorboards. Everything in that house knew my hands. I had replaced the garbage disposal after Thanksgiving. I had sealed the back windows when the January rain started creeping in. I had rebuilt the cedar fence after a storm dropped a branch across the yard. Allison called those things chores. I called them love, before love started sounding like unpaid labor with a wedding ring attached. Our house sat on a quiet street in Brentwood, with tall maples in the front yard and a stone mailbox Allison insisted looked more refined than brick. She told people we found it together, which was almost true if together meant she chose paint colors after I had already bought it. The deed predated our marriage by 4 years. Mercer Family Trust held the property because my father taught me early that comfort without structure is just a future argument waiting for better lighting. I never hid that from Allison. I simply did not lead with it at dinner parties. There is a difference between privacy and deception, but people who benefit from privacy often call it deception the moment it stops serving them. At first, Allison loved that I was steady. She said I made the world feel less sharp. She liked the way I checked her tires before road trips, kept emergency cash in the glove compartment, and remembered which restaurants had quiet corners because loud rooms gave her headaches. When we married, she would put her feet in my lap on Sunday nights and say the house felt safe because I was in it. I believed her. A man can live a long time on one sentence, said sincerely. Then Chase Reynolds appeared at a charity tasting downtown, all white teeth, tailored jackets, and opinions about freedom he never had to finance. He worked event marketing for a beverage company and talked like every room was one clever caption away from becoming his stage. Allison laughed differently around him. Lighter, sharper, like she was auditioning for a version of herself that did not have a husband waiting with the porch light on. I noticed the change before I admitted it. The late dinners, the sudden privacy settings, the new friends who said things like you deserve to feel alive, as if marriage were a storage unit and I had locked her inside. By the end of summer, Allison had turned ordinary questions into courtroom evidence. If I asked what time she expected to be home, I was monitoring her. If I offered to pick her up, I was smothering her. If I said nothing, I was emotionally unavailable. There was no correct answer, only new ways to be wrong. That is how disrespect trains a man to stop speaking. Not because he has nothing to say, but because every word returns from the other side wearing a different accusation. The laptop chimed. My attorney, Rebecca Sloan, answered faster than I expected. Received. I will initiate the prepared separation notice and property access protocol. Do not engage directly tonight unless necessary. Document all communication. I read the message twice. Property access protocol sounded colder than it felt. It did not mean locking a wife out of her life. It meant drawing a legal line around what had always been mine before she started using it as a backdrop for humiliating me. The Brentwood house. The lake cabin near Center Hill. The SUV lease guaranteed through my company. The accounts that paid for the lifestyle she called independence when she was bragging, and partnership when the bill arrived. My phone lit up at 1:03 a.m. Allison calling. I let it ring. Then again at 1:05. Then a text. Are you serious? Another. You cannot say that to me. I looked at those words for a long time. You cannot say that to me. Not I should not have embarrassed you. Not are you okay? Not I am sorry. The first pain she named was the boundary. That told me everything. I stood, walked to the small table by the back door, and picked up the spare key with the brass lake cabin tag. For years, that key had meant welcome. That night, it sounded different in my palm. Not revenge. Not anger. Consequence. Outside, headlights moved briefly across the front windows as a car passed down the street. I did not know where Allison was yet. Rooftop bar. Chase's Circle. Some downtown sidewalk full of neon and borrowed confidence. But I knew one thing with a calm that scared me a little. When she finally came home, she was going to learn that freedom and access were not the same word. By 1:18 a.m., Allison had stopped calling and started performing through text messages. That was how I knew she was still with people. Alone, she would have called angry, then scared, then angry again. With an audience, she typed like a woman drafting a speech for applause. You do not own me. You are proving my point. This is why I need space. Each message arrived brighter than the last, each one trying to turn the locked door in front of her into evidence against the man inside. I sat at the kitchen island, laptop open, phone beside the sink, watching her words appear while the house stayed dark around me. The strange part was how calm I felt. Not peaceful. Calm. Peace is warm. Calm can be cold enough to preserve what is left of you. Rebecca Sloan sent the first formal notice at 1:21 a.m. to Allison's email, copied to mine. Temporary separation communication guidelines. Property status clarification. Request for counsel contact before attempting access after notice. Clean language. Careful language. The kind of language that exists because emotion is a terrible locksmith. I did not change the gate code myself. I did not need to. The Brentwood house had a monitored access system tied to the trust account and property manager, because when you own more than one property, convenience becomes a liability if no one respects boundaries. The change had already been authorized under the prepared protocol, limited and documented, not some midnight stunt with a screwdriver and a grudge. People imagine boundaries as dramatic. Most of the time, they are just emails, timestamps, and a professional doing exactly what the paperwork allows. At 1:36, my phone rang again. Allison. I answered this time and said nothing. The rooftop noise had faded. She was outside now. I could hear traffic, wind, maybe the distant low sound of music behind a door. Daniel, she said, and the performance had cracks in it. Tell me you are not actually doing this. I looked at the empty space where her SUV should have been. I am following the notice. Notice? She laughed once, sharp and uncertain. Are you serious? You called a lawyer because I went out. No, I said. I called a lawyer because you turned disrespect into a lifestyle and called it freedom. She went quiet. For the first time that night, the silence belonged to both of us. Then Chase's voice came faintly in the background, asking if everything was okay. Allison covered the phone poorly and told him to give her a second. That little muffled exchange did more than anger me. It clarified me. She had made me a public villain in front of a man who was still standing close enough to hear the fallout. Is he still there? I asked. Do not start, she snapped. I am not property. I agreed with you. No, you threatened me. I stood and walked to the back hallway, passing the framed photo from our trip to Charleston, the one where she wore a blue sundress and leaned into me like I was the safest place on earth. The photo did not hurt the way I expected. It looked like evidence from another case. A threat takes something that belongs to you, I said. A boundary protects something that does not. She exhaled hard. So now the house is not mine? I looked at the ceiling, at the recessed lights she chose, at the crown molding she called too plain after I paid to have it installed. It was your home because I wanted to share it with my wife. It was never yours because you could mock me from a rooftop and still keep the benefits. The line went very quiet. I could hear her breathing. Somewhere on her end, Chase said her name again, lower this time, less confident. Men like Chase enjoy other people's open doors. They rarely enjoy being present when one closes. Allison's voice softened just enough to be dangerous. Daniel, come on. I was embarrassed. You called me in front of everyone. That almost pulled the old reflex from me. Apologize. Smooth it over. Accept the blame so the night can end. But the old reflex met the new fact and stopped. You answered in front of everyone, I said. You chose the room. She did not have an answer for that. Not a good one. At 1:49, Rebecca texted again. Confirmation, notice delivered and access protocol active. Advise no further direct discussion. I read it while Allison waited on the line, maybe hoping the quiet meant I was weakening. It did not. It meant the professionals had finished what my heart had taken too long to start. All communication goes through Rebecca now, I said. Who is Rebecca? My attorney. Her breath caught. Just slightly. You already had an attorney? I looked at the spare key on the counter, the brass cabin tag dull under the kitchen light. 19 days ago, you told Claire I was a boring man with useful assets. You said it in our driveway while I was in the garage fixing the sprinkler line. Silence. Full silence this time. No wind. No traffic. No chase. Just a woman discovering that quiet men sometimes hear the sentence that ends them. Daniel, she whispered. I ended the call before my name could become a hook. At 2:10 a.m., the gate camera picked up headlights rolling slowly along the curb, then stopping in front of the house like the driver expected the world to apologize and open. I was still in the kitchen, standing beside the island with the laptop closed, when the security screen lit up. Allison's white SUV sat outside the iron gate, front tires angled slightly, engine running, windshield catching the porch light in a dull silver glare. For years, that driveway had recognized her before she even reached it. The gate would open, the garage would lift, the hallway light would guide her in, and I would pretend not to notice how late it was if pretending kept the peace. Not that night. She punched in the code once. Nothing. Again. Nothing. On the third try, she hit each number harder, as if force could convince electronics to remember a marriage differently. My phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. Then the intercom chimed. I answered from the kitchen wall panel because Rebecca's instruction had been unless necessary, and this was necessary. Allison's face appeared on the small screen, washed pale by the gate light, hair loosened by the wind, expression caught between anger and disbelief. Behind her, Chase's car rolled past slowly, then kept going. That detail did not surprise me. Men who encourage rebellion rarely volunteer to carry luggage afterward. "Open the gate," she said. No greeting. No apology. Just command, dressed as outrage. I looked at her through the camera, not through memory. That helped. Memory would have shown me the woman who danced barefoot in this kitchen while I made pancakes on our first Saturday here. The camera showed me the woman who had laughed on speakerphone while another man stood close enough to enjoy it. "The notice has been delivered," I said. "Rebecca's contact information is in your email." Allison stared into the lens. "This is my home." There it was. The word home, arriving only after property had stopped being convenient. I kept my voice even. "It was shared with you as my wife. Tonight you made it clear you wanted separation from that role." Her mouth tightened. "I said I was not your property. That does not mean you get to lock me out like some stranger." "You are not a stranger," I said. "You are my wife, and that is why this is being handled legally instead of emotionally." That slowed her down for half a breath. Then pride came back, because pride hates a pause. "Daniel, this is insane. My clothes are in there. My medication is in there. My work laptop is in there." I had expected that, because adults make plans before they draw lines. A neutral pickup can be arranged in the morning. Anything urgent can be brought out by the property manager tonight. She looked away from the camera, then back. "The property manager? Are you hearing yourself?" I almost smiled, but there was no joy in it. Yes, for the first time in months. The wind moved through the trees along the fence. The maples were bare, their branches black against the porch lights, and the whole street seemed to hold its breath. Allison wrapped her coat tighter around herself. She had dressed for a rooftop, not a locked gate in the suburbs at 2 in the morning. "You are punishing me," she said. "No," I answered. "I am no longer financing the version of freedom where I am mocked in public and responsible in private." The sentence landed through the speaker and changed her face. Not enough to make her sorry. Enough to make her calculate. "Is this about Chase?" she asked. I let out one quiet breath. There it was, the smaller story she wanted because it was easier to fight. A jealous husband. Another man. A bad night. A misunderstanding. "Chase is not the foundation," I said. "He is only the light that showed the crack." She blinked at that. I continued, because some truths only come once and deserve to be said cleanly. "This is about you telling Claire I was a boring man with useful assets. This is about calling concern control. This is about enjoying the house, the cabin, the car, and the accounts while treating the person behind them like an obstacle to your image." Her lips parted, but nothing came out. For once, there was no audience to reward the performance. No rooftop laughter. No Chase leaning back with that polished grin. Just a camera, a gate, and the sound of her own choices echoing back. She lowered her voice. "Can I at least come in and talk?" That was the oldest door in the world. Just talk. Just 5 minutes. Just let me explain. But explanations offered after consequences begin are often negotiations wearing softer clothes. I looked down at my left hand, at the ring still there, because my lawyer had paperwork and my heart had not yet caught up to my decision. Then I looked back at the screen. No, not tonight. Her eyes shone, but I could not tell if it was cold, anger, or the first edge of fear. Maybe all three. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked. The question was quiet enough to hurt. I hated that it hurt. That is what people misunderstand about boundaries. They do not stop love from existing. They only stop love from being used as a hallway back into disrespect. "Call Claire," I said. "Call a hotel. Call Rebecca if you need essentials arranged. You are free, Allison. But freedom does not include walking back into what you mocked." She stepped back from the intercom like the words had reached through the speaker and rearranged the night. For a long moment, she stood there under the gate light, a white coat against dark pavement, looking at a house she had called hers only after forgetting the man who made it feel safe. Then she turned toward her SUV. I ended the intercom, switched off the kitchen light, and stood in the dark while the gate camera showed her taillights pulling away from the curb. The house did not feel victorious. It felt awake. The next morning arrived without forgiveness. It came in pale winter light across the kitchen floor, showing every quiet detail the night had left behind. The spare key on the counter, the closed laptop, the empty driveway, my wedding ring still on my hand, heavier now than it had been at the altar. I had slept 2 hours in the guest room because the primary bedroom still smelled faintly like Allison's perfume and old arguments. At 7:12 a.m., Rebecca Sloan called. Not texted. Called. Attorneys only call that early when paper has started moving faster than emotion. Daniel, she said, calm as courthouse marble. Allison retained temporary counsel at 6 this morning. They are asking for access to personal belongings and clarification regarding the vehicle. I stood at the sink and watched steam rise from a cup of coffee I did not want. Arrange the pickup, I said. Whatever is personal, she can have. Clothes, medication, work laptop, jewelry, anything clearly hers. Rebecca paused. And the SUV? I looked through the window at the empty space where it used to sit, the clean rectangle of driveway protected from frost by years of habit. It is a company-guaranteed lease. Let them know we are not reporting it or making noise. She can keep it temporarily until the separation agreement addresses transportation. No drama. Rebecca's voice softened just a degree. That is the right answer. I almost laughed. The right answer had rarely protected me in marriage, but apparently it still mattered in law. By 9:30, Claire arrived with Allison in the passenger seat of a silver sedan, not at the gate this time, but at the curb, where the property manager met them with a clipboard and a polite expression. I watched from the upstairs office window, far enough back that Allison could not see me. She wore jeans, a tan coat, and sunglasses even though the sky was cloudy. Claire looked uncomfortable in the way people look when the private story they believe starts requiring signatures. 2 movers carried Allison's suitcases from the front porch after the property manager brought them out. Her medication was in a sealed bag, her laptop in a padded case, her jewelry box wrapped in a towel because I remembered the clasp was loose. That detail bothered me, not because it was kind, because kindness had become muscle memory, and muscle memory does not ask whether someone deserves it before it moves. Allison looked toward the house more than once. Not the whole house. The windows, the porch, the kitchen side door, places where I had once appeared automatically because she expected me to. I did not appear. That was harder than opening the gate would have been. Boundaries look cold from the outside. From the inside, they can feel like holding a door shut while every old version of you begs to let the person in. At 10:04, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. This is Allison. Thank you for sending my things out carefully. I stared at the sentence longer than I should have. It was not an apology, but it was not an attack. That made it more dangerous. Softness can be a hook when your heart is still bleeding. I forwarded it to Rebecca without responding. By noon, the first financial clarifications went out. The Brentwood house belonged to Mercer Family Trust. The Center Hill Lake cabin belonged to the same trust. Allison's personal credit cards were hers. Household cards tied to my business account were suspended for new personal charges. The SUV lease remained active temporarily, but company fuel access ended. No punishment. No spectacle. Just labels returned to the correct drawers. That afternoon, my office felt like a museum of the life Allison had enjoyed without reading the plaques. Property tax records, trust documents, insurance policies, lease agreements, maintenance invoices. She had called it our lifestyle whenever she wanted the glow of it. She had called it my control whenever accountability entered the room. Rebecca emailed a summary at 3:18 p.m. Counsel confirms receipt. Expect emotional response once documents are reviewed. She was right. At 4:02, Allison called from Claire's phone. I did not answer. Then came a voicemail. Her voice was thin, tired, stripped of the rooftop shine. Daniel, I did not know about the cabin. I did not know the house was structured like that. I thought we were building everything together. I closed my eyes. That was the sentence I had been waiting for, and it still managed to hurt. because part of it was true. I had wanted to build together. I had shared space, comfort, keys, holidays, furniture, quiet mornings, lake weekends, and the kind of security people only notice after it stops arriving automatically. But sharing is not the same as surrendering ownership to someone who uses the gift as evidence against you. I played the voicemail once, then saved it to the folder Rebecca had asked me to keep. Documentation matters. So does not answering while pain is still looking for a way back inside. That night, I walked through the house room by room. The closet looked half empty. The bathroom counter was bare on her side. The living room had a blank space where she had taken a framed print from Santa Fe. The house was quieter, but not dead. It felt like a room after a loud guest finally leaves, and the walls remember their own shape. I stood by the back door with the brass cabin key in my palm and looked out at the dark yard. Allison had said she was not my property, and she had been right. No person should belong to another. But respect does not belong to the person who mocks it. Peace does not belong to the person who spends it carelessly. And a home is not truly shared with someone who only values the roof after the door is closed. For 3 days, Allison lived at Claire's townhouse in Franklin and learned the difference between visiting someone's life and depending on it. Claire was kind, but kindness has square footage. A guest room is still a guest room when your suitcases line the wall and your shampoo sits in a travel bag on the floor. The first morning, Allison called it temporary. By the second, she called it unfair. By the third, she called Rebecca Sloan. I heard about it from Rebecca at 8:40 a.m. while I was in my office downtown, reviewing a lease renewal for a retail complex near Cool Springs. Her counsel is requesting temporary access to the Brentwood residence, Rebecca said. They are arguing marital use and emotional distress. I leaned back in my chair and looked out over Nashville, where glass buildings caught the winter sun and traffic moved along Interstate 65 like nothing personal had ever happened in the world. And the trust documents? I asked. Strong, Rebecca said. Premarital ownership, separate asset structure, documented maintenance through trust accounts, and no commingling significant enough to create a clean argument for immediate control. She may have claims to discuss later, but she does not get to ignore property boundaries tonight because she regrets the optics. Optics. That was the word Allison understood best. Not home. Not marriage. Optics. By noon, her messages shifted again. Not angry this time. Strategic. I need stability. I have work. This is affecting my mental health. We should handle this like adults. Every sentence sounded reasonable until you placed it beside the night at the rooftop bar, the speakerphone, the laughter, the way she had turned my concern into a performance. Adults do not become adults only when consequences arrive. They are adults when the room is still laughing and they decide whether to join in. I did not answer. Rebecca did. That afternoon, I drove to the Center Hill Lake cabin alone. The air turned colder as the road dipped through bare trees, the kind of Tennessee winter that does not bury the world in snow but strips it down until every branch looks honest. The cabin sat above the water, cedars siding dark against the gray sky, porch chairs facing the lake like two people who had run out of conversation. Allison loved that porch. She had filled her social media with pictures from it, morning coffee, paperback novels, wool blankets, captions about needing peace. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. It smelled like pine boards, dust, and the faint trace of the cinnamon candles she used to burn in October. Nothing dramatic waited for me. Just a quiet room with a stone fireplace, a folded throw on the sofa, and framed photos on the mantel. Allison smiling in oversized sunglasses on the dock. Allison holding a mug by the window. Allison beside me at sunset, her hand on my chest, both of us looking younger because neither of us had learned what contempt does to a face. I took that photo down and held it for a while. Not because I wanted to keep it, because I wanted to remember that the woman in it had existed, even if she had not lasted. The cabin had been my father's dream before it was mine. He bought the land when I was 27 and still believed hard work alone could protect a man from loss. After he died, the trust finished the build. I brought Allison here the first spring after our wedding and gave her a key with a brass tag. She cried on the porch that night and said no one had ever given her a place that felt like breathing. I believed that meant gratitude. Maybe it did then. But gratitude, if not practiced, becomes entitlement wearing softer clothes. I walked room to room, making a list for the property manager. personal items to return, shared photos to copy, pantry to clear, access to restrict. The work was ordinary, which made it brutal. Ending a life together is not one big goodbye. It is deciding who gets the blue cooler, the spare phone charger, the blanket from Asheville, the coffee mugs with chips on the rim. At 5:12 p.m., my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Allison. I listened once. Her voice was smaller than before. Daniel, I went too far that night. I know that. But you are making me feel like I never belonged anywhere with you. I looked around the cabin, at the porch she loved, the lake she photographed, the rooms I had opened to her without asking her to earn them. Then I saved the voicemail and slid the phone into my pocket. The answer came to me slowly, not as anger, but as a sentence I wished I had understood years earlier. Belonging is not proven by how freely you enter a place. It is proven by how carefully you treat it once someone trusts you with the key. By the end of the first week, Allison's anger had learned to wear better clothes. It arrived through counsel now, formatted in polite paragraphs, asking for temporary access, shared use, reasonable accommodations, and a cooperative tone. Rebecca forwarded each message with short notes that translated the language into reality. She wants back into the house. She wants continued use of the cabin. She wants the SUV without company limits. She wants the benefits of the marriage while contesting the duties that came with it. I read the summary at my office desk while rain moved down the glass in thin vertical lines, Nashville gray beyond the window, traffic sliding along Broadway like a city minding its own business. I did not feel angry anymore. Anger had been useful for about 6 hours. After that, it became too loud to trust. What settled in its place was clarity, and clarity is not warm. It simply turns on the lights. The mediation call was scheduled for Friday at 2. Allison appeared on screen from Claire's guest room, sitting in front of a white wall with a framed print behind her that said "Choose Joy" in looping gold letters. She looked tired, less polished, hair pulled back, no rooftop shine left in her face. Her attorney sat beside her, a young man in a blue suit who spoke as if every sentence had been sanded smooth. Rebecca sat next to me in my downtown conference room, a folder open, pen ready, eyes calm. The call began with logistics, personal belongings, temporary transportation, financial disclosures, communication boundaries. Then Allison interrupted, not sharply, but with the desperation of someone tired of hearing her life described in neutral terms. I just want to understand when I became a stranger, she said. Rebecca glanced at me, but I answered before she could. You did not become a stranger. You became someone I could no longer trust with access. Allison looked down. Her attorney shifted in his chair. Access to property is one issue, he said. The emotional nature of the marriage is another. I nodded. That is exactly why the property has to be handled by documents. For a while, nobody spoke. The screen froze for half a second, then came back, and Allison's eyes were wet. I never wanted your things, she said. I wanted freedom. I looked at the woman who had slept under my roof, driven the vehicle I guaranteed, vacationed at my cabin, and used my quietness as proof I had nothing to offer except convenience. Freedom from what? I asked. She opened her mouth, then stopped. That was the first honest pause I had heard from her in months. Not because she had no answer, but because the answers available to her sounded smaller outside the rooftop crowd. Freedom from being asked if she was safe. Freedom from being expected home when she said she would be. Freedom from thanking the man who paid for comfort without making a speech about it. Freedom from the mirror my concern held up to choices she wanted to call harmless. I felt watched, she said finally. Her voice was thin. I felt like I was always disappointing you. That sentence reached me. Not enough to change the facts, but enough to remind me that marriages do not collapse from one side only. Maybe my silence had become a wall. Maybe my steadiness had given her something to push against. But being imperfect is not the same as deserving public disrespect. Then you should have talked to me, I said, not turn me into a joke. Her face folded a little at that. Rebecca moved the conversation back to terms. Allison would keep the SUV for 30 days with fuel and insurance transferred to her responsibility after that. A supervised pickup would handle remaining belongings. No access to the Brentwood house without written agreement. No access to the lake cabin. Temporary support would be discussed separately from trust property. Allison did not argue as much as I expected. That almost hurt more. People fight hardest for what they believe they deserve. She was starting to understand the difference between losing a home and losing permission. Near the end of the call, Allison asked if she could say one thing without attorneys correcting it. Rebecca looked at me. I nodded once. Allison leaned closer to the camera. Chase is not in my life, she said. He disappeared after that night. I believed her. Men like Chase do not stay when the music stops and the bill arrives. But the statement did not give me the satisfaction she maybe thought it would. Chase had never been the wound. He had been a spotlight. That is between you and your life now, I said. Her eyes searched my face through the screen, looking for jealousy, relief, anything that proved the old door still had a hinge. I gave her nothing false. The call ended at 3:14 p.m. Rebecca closed her folder. You did well, she said. I looked at the blank screen where Allison's face had been. It does not feel like winning. Rebecca stood and buttoned her jacket. Boundaries rarely do at first. After she left, I stayed in the conference room alone while the rain softened the city outside. My phone was quiet. My calendar was full. The house in Brentwood would be empty when I returned, but for the first time, empty did not mean abandoned. It meant no one inside was laughing at my concern and calling it love's opposite. It meant the rooms were finally allowed to tell the truth. 2 weeks after the mediation call, the Brentwood house began to sound like itself again. That surprised me. I had expected emptiness to echo, to punish me with every room Allison no longer moved through. Instead, the house settled into a quieter rhythm. The coffee maker brewed 1 cup in the morning. The hallway stayed clear of shopping bags. The kitchen island held mail, keys, and a small bowl of oranges instead of receipts from restaurants where I had never been invited. I fixed the loose hinge on the pantry door one Saturday afternoon, not because anyone had asked, but because the sound bothered me. That was when I realized how much of my life had been built around preventing someone else's irritation. A squeak, a bill, a late appointment, a warning light on the dashboard, a lake weekend arranged before she even admitted she was tired. I had called it devotion. Maybe some of it was. But devotion without respect becomes maintenance, and a man can maintain a life for years without being allowed to live inside it. Allison's remaining belongings left in 3 scheduled pickups. The last box was a narrow one filled with framed photos she had not wanted at first, then asked for through counsel after Claire convinced her memory was not property. I approved it. There was no reason to keep pictures as trophies. 1 frame stayed behind by mistake, tucked behind a stack of cookbooks in the breakfast nook. It showed us at the Center Hill cabin, sitting on the porch at sunset, her head against my shoulder, my hand wrapped around a mug, the lake behind us smooth as glass. I held it for a minute, then placed it in an envelope for the property manager to return. Healing is not pretending the good parts were fake. Healing is refusing to let the good parts excuse the harm. In early March, Allison requested 1 in-person conversation. Rebecca advised against it unless I wanted closure on my own terms. I chose a coffee shop in Franklin, public, quiet, neutral, the kind of place where people spoke softly because laptops were open and no one wanted to become background noise. Allison arrived first. She wore a gray sweater, simple jeans, no dramatic makeup, no polished audience version of herself. For a moment, I saw the woman from the early years, the one who used to leave notes on the refrigerator and fall asleep during old movies. Then she looked up, and the present returned. We sat across from each other with 2 untouched coffees between us. I am not here to ask for the house, she said. That was a good first sentence. Not enough, but good. I nodded. Then why are you here? She folded her hands around the paper cup. Because I keep replaying that night. Not the gate. Before that. The call. What I said. The coffee shop hissed with steam behind the counter. A couple near the window argued gently over a map. Life, ordinary and whole, continued around a marriage learning how to become history. Allison looked down. I thought freedom meant not having to answer to anyone. And now? I asked. She breathed in slowly. Now I think I used the word because responsibility made me feel guilty. That was the first answer that did not feel rehearsed. I let it stand. She continued, voice low. Chase made everything sound exciting. Like I was being brave. Like every question from you was a chain. But he never asked whether I got home safe. He never paid attention long enough to notice what I needed before I asked. He liked the version of me that laughed at you. I felt that sentence enter quietly. Not as victory. As confirmation. I did not want to own you, I said. I wanted to trust you with what I had built. Her eyes filled, but she did not reach for my hand. That restraint mattered. I know that now. I looked at her for a long moment, at the woman who had lost access before she understood what access meant. Knowing now does not repair then. She nodded. A tear slipped down, and she wiped it quickly, almost embarrassed by it. I am sorry, Daniel. Not because of the house. Not because of the cabin. Because I made you feel like loving me was something you had to defend. For the first time, the apology landed without hooks. No request. No bargain. No doorway hidden behind it. Just truth, late but finally clean. I accepted it with a nod, because forgiveness, if it ever came, would be private work, not a gift handed across a coffee table on demand. When we stood to leave, she asked one last question. Will you ever think of me without anger? I looked through the window at the wet sidewalk, the parked cars, the gray Tennessee sky. I already do, I said. That is why I can leave without trying to make you hurt back. She closed her eyes, and I walked out before the moment turned into another negotiation. Outside, the air smelled like rain and roasted coffee. I got into my truck and drove back toward Brentwood, not fast, not dramatic, just steady. The house would be quiet when I arrived. The gate would open because it recognized me, but more than that, because I finally recognized what belonged there. Peace, respect, and a man who had stopped confusing access with love. The week following the mediation passed in quiet routines and small adjustments. I drove to the cabin one evening, the lake water reflecting twilight, empty and calm, a mirror for reflection. The Brentwood house stayed orderly, neutral, waiting for neither apology nor permission to breathe. Emails from Allison arrived occasionally, polite, minimal, acknowledging receipts, returning only necessary information. No hidden digs, no tests. I processed each carefully, not because I feared her, but because clarity is built from discipline, not emotion. On Saturday morning, I walked the property, checking windows, the gate, and the cedar fence, thinking about all the moments that had built a home. Each board, each lock, each light fixture reflected decisions made long before anger or misunderstanding entered the room. I understood then that respect is a practice, not a feeling, and boundaries are not walls, but frames that hold what is precious in place. Later, I received a text from Allison. Thank you for managing this fairly. It was brief, sincere, and carried no expectation. I saved it without responding. In the afternoon, I organized the cabin for the property manager, noting items to be returned or stored, letting each action remind me that order matters more than sentiment. By sunset, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, the lake still and silver under the fading light. The house, the cabin, and even the driveway felt like a life reclaimed, not from victory, but from understanding the difference between access and trust, between possession and respect. It was quiet, and for the first time, that quiet felt earned. I thought about the journey, about lessons learned in patience and presence, and how a relationship, no matter its ending, teaches more about integrity than anger ever could. As I watched the last light disappear over the lake, I considered you, the viewer, wondering how you would have acted, what boundaries you might have set, and whether you would recognize the value of respect before it is tested. Think about that. Reflect on the way trust shapes our spaces and our hearts. And if you found this story compelling, the lessons worth sharing, consider subscribing to the channel to explore more narratives that examine life, relationships, and the quiet power of integrity, so that next time, when faced with challenges of loyalty and freedom, you can navigate them with clarity and calm.